Before we get started, if you love shivery fairy stories, I really think you'll love my novel, The Ghost of Nothing. It's got that same haunted, magical, eerie vibe of this channel, but turned up to 11. It's available as an audiobook, ebook, paperback, and hardcover. Honestly, it's the best thing I've ever created, so if you like what I do and you haven't read it yet, I really think you're missing out on a special experience. Links are in the description. And now, on to the stories. This story might be better explained by what we Scots sometimes call second sight. I believe my wife Frances, named after her grandmother, might just have it. Now, Scottish families often have old tales of fortune telling and such, though folk are a bit more skeptical these days. My wife owns a small crystal ball that belonged to her grandmother. According to my wife, her gran used to read tea leaves and use that crystal ball to tell fortunes. Her mom, Violet, always claimed that Frances, my wife's grandmother, was the seventh daughter of a seventh daughter, and in Scottish lore, that's said to give someone second sight. I've always been skeptical, I'll admit, very skeptical. But early on in our marriage, my wife would occasionally mention something just offhand, and sure enough, it would happen shortly after. Still, I thought I'd prove it was all nonsense. I've always been interested in genealogy, so I dug into the family tree, determined to show that my wife's gran wasn't really the seventh daughter of a seventh daughter. Turns out, I was wrong. There were 7 daughters born, followed by another 6, and possibly one infant death that wasn't recorded, maybe due to the child being born out of wedlock. So in the end, the old family tale checked out. I started to wonder if my wife might have inherited something from her gran after all. At the time, we lived in East Kilbride, but I was a keen hill walker and had romantic notions of living out in the country. A bit of a Lord of the Manor fantasy, I suppose. I started looking for houses closer to the hills, and after 2 years of searching, and no predictions from Frances, I finally found what seemed to be the perfect place. A house right outside Aberfoyle, right on the shore of Loch Ard. Absolutely spectacular. I put in an offer, but didn't get it. But Frances said, "You'll get that house." I asked her why she thought that, and she just said, "I don't know why, I just know." Over the next year or so, I kept looking in the area, fell in love with it really. And one day, a friend told me the family who bought that house was struggling and might sell. I reached out, and in the end, they did sell it to me. So my wife's prediction came true. Around the same time, I'd printed a book for an author, Lewis Stott, The Enchantment of the Trossachs, which centered on Reverend Robert Kirk, the minister said to have been taken by the fairies in Aberfoyle. I remember telling Lewis I thought it was all a bit of romantic nonsense, but he insisted there was truth to it. Anyway, once we moved into the house, it took about 6 months to get it half livable. It was one of those big old places with a drawing room and all. I'd often sit there looking out at the view, thinking how lucky I was to be living in this place, when I started sensing something out of the corner of my eye. Not seeing exactly, just a presence always to my left. At first, I assumed it was a reflection or a trick of the light and ignored it. But it kept happening. Eventually, I asked Frances, "Have you ever sensed anything in this room?" And she said, as casually as anything, "Oh, you mean the fairies? Yeah, I've seen them." I was taken aback. But I told her I hadn't seen anything, just had this sense. And oddly enough, if I had to describe what I thought I was sensing, I'd say there was a group of beings about 18 inches tall, floating 2 or 3 feet off the ground, mostly moving across this bay window area. I couldn't explain how I knew that, I just did. Frances said that was more or less what she saw too, though sometimes she'd see them moving right up the room before crossing the window. Then there came this one night. To borrow a Glaswegian phrase, it was like Argyle Street on a Saturday. In other words, there was a great deal of activity. Both of us felt it, and for the first time, I sensed them moving up the room toward the window. However, the most astounding thing that happened was that we had two cats that were not allowed in the drawing room. But for whatever reason, that night, we let them in. They were sitting on the windowsill, calm at first, then their heads started tracking something. Same direction as where we sensed the fairies going. And just as I sensed the fairies cross the bay window, both cats suddenly leapt off the sill and scrambled up the curtains like they were chasing something. Neither cat had ever climbed any furniture or soft furnishing anywhere in the house before. After that, I phoned Lewis to apologize for calling it all nonsense. But he laughed and said he still didn't think it was fairies I had in my house, though he was glad I was now open to the possibility. He said the area around Aberfoyle and Lochard sits right on a fault line where the earth split millions of years ago, and that there are strange magnetic forces in the ground. He thought that was a more likely explanation. I'm not so sure. I now genuinely believe there's something in that house. What are fairies? I don't know. Apparitions, maybe? But whatever they are, they're in the house. This happened a few years ago, not far from where I live in Wales. I'm a medium. I don't go doing readings, but I pick things up. Have done since I was a child. There are two local spirits that speak to me, Udreg and Freid. On that day, I had set out walking with no particular plan, just following the pull of a current I'd sensed before, hoping to go wherever Udreg and Freid might take me. It was warm, a tiny breeze, butterflies flitted through the rampant hedges, songbirds accompanied the bees' kazoos, and I was picking my way through tangles of prolific brambles and nettles. The area is known locally for unusual energies and folklore. Some say it sits on an old dragon line, which in geomantic terms is a sort of ley line, a path of earth energy. I had my dowsing rods with me. When I hold the rods loosely in both hands, they swing or cross on their own when energy is present. It's a way of asking yes or no questions or following the direction of energy flow. I was hoping to sense the presence of Idreg. The last time I'd encountered her presence was a few weeks earlier at a crossroads of paths. She'd made off across a pasture to the other side of a hump in the land. I'd have liked to have gone with her, but I needed to gain permission from the landholder first. Instead, I had tracked her remotely to a hawthorn in a fairy hill embankment by an ancient clan. There had once stood, possibly for thousands of years, a tiny village there, with gorgeous, fragrant roses that once decorated walls and gardens. But that day, as I walked along a narrow path past a wooded rise, the rods began to pull to the left, crossing with increasing intensity. I followed them and began to sense the presence of Freid. I followed her spirit southwest across the field and along woods bordering an infant river to skirt the hump, and then west to loop in a damp area at the bottom of a field before heading eastward. Several yards later, she turned south to cross a fence and climb a slope. Following her, I felt the sense that I was underwater somehow, but as I moved up the slope, I felt we were surfacing. I sensed another spirit then, Kriya the buzzard, wheeling overhead. She was letting me know that I'd soon be coming upon something extraordinary. I now felt the presence of Udreg. I continued following the rods, and Udreg and Freid until I reached a place that I sensed was a gravesite, and I knew this was the place I was supposed to stop. I tuned in and discovered that this was the last resting place of a lady called Irwen, who was a healer and herbalist. She had lived in a cottage close by with her 3 brothers who had passed away before her. I asked her how to spell her name, and she could not read or write, so she didn't know. I asked her what era she lived in. She didn't know that either. She had heard of the Normans and the Flemish, but their invasion had been long ago. She knew nothing of Oliver Cromwell or that civil war. I asked her if she was well known in the area. She said she was. Are you religious? I asked. She said no. I didn't feel like she had any bitterness towards religion. It was more like she didn't care for it, didn't want anything to do with it. She loved nature and helping people. Irwen was buried outside the churchyard when she passed away. I asked her if this saddened her. It didn't. Just the way things were, she said. And she loved being there. Her name means white snow. Before I departed, she told me that she had been expecting me. I asked her if she knew of the goddess Freud. She did very well, and she said that Freud was very special to her. I told her that I would return one day soon. She was happy to hear that. Such a beautiful soul. I said goodbye for now and continued up the hill. I followed Utrag and Freud to the field wall and traced along it till the dragon slipped through and into the fairy hill. Here I stood still and asked for leave to enter. I heard a voice, this time audibly. It said, "Not at this time." There was no one around, but the message was definite. I respected that and turned back. On my return journey, I saw underneath a hawthorn tree the figure of a tall, slim, silvery white-haired woman. It shimmered briefly, manifested quickly, and then vanished. She was dressed in a red cape or shawl and had a long yellow dress on with a pattern on it, and she was waving farewell to me. I think it was Irwen. Walking back to my car after this, I felt ecstatic. It was a beautiful day and a beautiful experience. This wasn't the first time I've encountered something out there, but it was one of the few that felt clearly fae, not ghost. The presence wasn't trapped or lost, it had authority. She was there because she chose to be, and I felt she was guarding something. I've had many experiences with fairies, ghosts, aliens, etc., and can tell the difference easily. This one felt fae. What are fairies? No one thing, and there are many species of them. Some present as human-like, but in reality their form is very different. I'm used to some people ignoring me when I speak of my encounters, but sometimes I've had company when these things happen, and often, too, have evidence. I don't know why people have such trouble believing and don't care, really. I'm just doing my best to show that life is infinitely more varied and fascinating than some would have us believe. This took place in Newark, UK in 1992. My husband and I were walking into town with our small child in tow. We'd had an argument earlier, and I felt I needed some time alone, so he continued into town with the stroller, and I went walking by myself. I felt very low and was caught up in my head, going over the details of the argument over and over, so I wasn't paying much attention to my surroundings. Soon I passed a funeral parlor entrance. At the same time, I noticed a tiny man walking toward me. Surprised, I stopped. I watched the man. Having noticed I'd stopped, he then slowly looked up at my face, and we made eye contact. It was like he was shocked. His tiny hands shot up open in fear, and he turned and ran behind a Royal Mail van that was parked in the funeral parlor forecourt. I was in complete disbelief. I followed the tiny man but couldn't find him anywhere. It was like he had vanished into thin air. Things I noticed about him: he was about 18 inches tall. Everything about him was brown: hair, skin, eyes, clothes. A brownie? His hair looked fluffy at the ends as it went slightly over his collar, as if it would only grow to that length. He wore brown trousers and a jacket. He had a snub nose. His skin was leathery, weather-worn. It was wrinkled. I didn't see any pointed ears or hat, but his head seemed bigger than expected and not in proportion to his body. I would say he was the shape of a newborn baby. Since having this experience, I have noticed people searching for elementals in forests and enchanted woods, etc. No need, they're obviously all around us. The right circumstances will allow us to see them, I believe. Around this time, I was sitting in circles in order to develop my mediumship. Maybe that helped, but maybe it also was because I was not searching for anything like this. I just stumbled across him. To conclude, I then caught up with my husband and we went into town as normal. I didn't tell anyone about the little man for a while afterwards, and as expected, I'm only half believed when I do. But at least I know they're 100% real. I think fairies are elementals who look after nature. I asked another medium's opinion about who the little man could have been, and she tuned in and said she thought he was something to do with bees. I wasn't surprised and felt this was right. I've been writing a novel that has primarily been channeled to me. Because of the nature of how the story comes to me, I often don't have any insight on the story, and I write it as I see it unveiling in my mind. In this one particular part in my story, a girl went to a psychic medium for a reading. The psychic uses a Celtic deck with pictures of fairies that look like they're dancing when shuffled. I was working on this part of the book in a trance-like state when I suddenly snapped out of it, realizing I had to get to work. I own a business that's next to my house. I set my laptop down and hurriedly went to work, forgetting all about the story for the time being. Then later that day, after I'd left work and completely forgotten about the story, I saw something beneath this large cypress tree that I sit under to meditate. It was a fairy, a little female fairy in a dress, bent over and tending to something at the trunk of the tree. She was only about the size of my hand, and in pale clothes with wings. It all happened so quickly, and I was so startled. She looked at me, and I could tell that she was startled to see that I could see her. And then she disappeared, leaving only a little gold puff behind her. I was so taken aback by this that I hurried into the house and wrote it all down in my journal to make sure I wouldn't forget any details of how or when it happened. I was amazed by the experience, but put it to the side and went on with my day. Then, later that same day, after supper, I went out the back door, and there, by the window, I saw a male fairy. He seemed to be doing the same thing the female fairy had been doing, bent over in the same way, tending to something. He was about the size of the female I'd seen, but male. This also happened very quickly. He too noticed that I noticed him, probably because I stopped and gasped, and he disappeared as well, leaving only that puff of what I think looked like a stream with a gold shimmer. Since this happened twice in the same day, and since it happened after I had written about fairies in my story, I assumed that's why I was able to see them. It's not that I didn't believe in fairies before this incident, but I wasn't sure the way I am now. This situation also made me remember something that happened many years ago. I visited a psychic for a reading about a problem I was dealing with at the time. Out of the blue, the psychic asked me if I believed in fairies, which had nothing whatsoever to do with the topic I was asking about. I told her, I have an open mind, but I'm not sure. Her response was, You will believe in them. Well, she was right about that. I think fairies are the original stewards of Earth. My grandmother experienced psychic premonitions at times in her life. She was a very down to earth sort of woman who never understood her psychic experiences. They unnerved her, so she rarely spoke of them. But she did tell me one story that I'll never forget. She was in the kitchen at the sink. As she was standing there washing up, she was gazing absently out of the window. There was a pile of fallen leaves under a tree in the back garden. Suddenly, the leaves started to move. She stopped her work and stared intently at the leaves, hoping she wasn't about to see a mouse or a rat. But then, to her amazement, 5 or 6 tiny fairies dressed in brown emerged out of the leaf pile. They seemed to be playing some kind of game. They appeared youthful and playful, just young people having fun. The only difference was that they were extremely small. She watched them for about a minute and then rubbed her eyes. When she opened her eyes again, the fairies had gone. My grandmother swore till her dying day that this happened, that she was telling the truth. The reason she thought they were fairies was because they looked like fairies and didn't seem supernatural to her in any way. She didn't think it was a psychic experience. As I said, those experiences always made her uncomfortable, and she was reluctant to speak of them. But this wasn't so with her fairy experience. She remembered it fondly and was happy to tell the story. I think the fairies she saw were just tiny people who meant no harm. This happened in Kentucky. I would like to say first that I think I might be psychic. I've had certain premonitions in the past that have led me to believe this, but the following encounter did not feel like a psychic experience. Even so, I'm mentioning this because perhaps there's a chance that fairies are more likely to be seen by those with a psychic sense. That's my feeling. On the night of the incident, I was fishing. It was around midnight, and I was on a boat out on a lake. There was a full moon. It was a beautiful night, warm and calm, when I started seeing lights flashing over the water. At first, I thought I was seeing fireflies, but as I moved closer to them, I could see that they had glowing, human-like bodies with wings attached. They shone in a variety of colors. They were moving very quickly, but I was clearly able to make out these glowing, humanoid forms. I've seen plenty of fireflies before, and these were nothing like them. They were beautiful, and I felt privileged to have had the chance to witness them. I could make out sounds they were making as well. They were high-pitched, like a conversation happening at an enhanced speed, but not unpleasant. Afterward, I started to see them almost nightly in the evening. This lasted for some time, but eventually I stopped seeing them. I think fairies are energy beings. Thanks for watching, and a huge thank you to everyone who submitted their stories for this one. Let me know your thoughts on these stories in the comments. Be sure to check out my website. There's more content out there now for anyone interested. It's a bit more fun and interactive with fairy paths you can follow. I mentioned in my last couple of videos that I had this idea for fairy creators that we could link to each other in a kind of fairy web ring, so it might make us a bit easier to discover. I'm still putting that together and hoping to launch it next month. So for fairy creators who've already reached out, I'll be in touch soon. And if you're a fairy creator interested in joining the ring, there's more information on my website and a form there where you can sign up. If you love eerie fairy lore like what you heard in this video, be sure to check out my fairy fantasy novel, The Ghosts of Nothing. It's about a girl from a small, famously haunted town. The people of the town blame the girl and her family for the haunting, believing them to be cursed because they have a history of mysterious deaths in the family. But the girl soon discovers that the truth is the town's hauntings, the mysterious deaths in her family, can all be traced to fairies. I don't want to give anything away more than that, but it's a very spooky Tim Burton kind of Wednesday Addams feeling story. The book has won some awards, including being a finalist in the Independent Author Association Best Book of the Year award. So if you enjoy the stories I share here, I think you'll really enjoy it. For a chance to win a free copy of the audiobook, subscribe to either of my newsletters. Every month, I randomly select a subscriber for a free giveaway, and it's completely free to join. You'll find the sign-up links on my website and in the description below. And I will send you emails about fairies. If you have a story of your own, I'd love to hear it. You can submit your fairy experiences through the forum on my website, where you'll also find the mailing list sign up and all the ways to stay in touch. A huge, huge thank you to all those who are supporting this channel financially, either through Patreon, Substack, or channel membership, as well as those who've made a one-time donation through PayPal or Ko-fi. Thank you so much for being a patron of the arts, essentially, for this independent artist. Your support means the world and makes work like this possible. If you'd like to support this channel, all the options for support are in the description below. The stories in this video came from subscribers and the Fairy Census, so a big thank you to everyone who submitted. The stories were edited for dramatic reasons, but if you like to read the original Census stories, you can follow the link in the description. All the links are in the description. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment, like, share, and subscribe if you're new. Help the algorithm discover me. It helps the channel grow. And don't forget to hit the bell to be notified when new videos go up. And until next time, this has been a visit from your scary fairy godmother.